Welcome to another edition of Soft Apocalypse Bar Prep. I'm your host, Kimber, and it's that time again, y'all. It's about a week before the bar exam. It's crunch time. We're living through a snowpocalypse, pandemic part 2, electric boogaloo. There's been a lot going on, guys, and it's not any better for folks who are going to be sitting down this time next week or thereabouts for the first full-length uniform bar exam that's going to be fully administered online. There are a lot of issues with this still. We've talked about this a lot in the past. And at this point, there's not much we can do. So what I want to talk about today is just strategies for how do you make the best use of your time for this final week that you have to prepare. So I'd like to put a focus, first of all, on folks for whom this is not their first time at the rodeo. So the October exam was fraught. There were issues galore. People were disqualified for numerous reasons that had nothing to do with skill or knowledge or competence or anything like that. And we also have first-timers and a combination of both who were not successful on the first try and who now do not have the luxury of studying full-time if they ever had that luxury. So a lot of you out there have been struggling with how do you manage work and family responsibilities, pandemic life, in addition to crazy weather we're having right now. I know a lot of people right now are snowed in. A lot of folks, there's rolling blackouts. There's blackouts in Texas. There's snow. There's snow in Louisiana. It's crazy. There's a lot going on right now, and it makes it very difficult, especially when you have one job right now, really, which is to pass the bar exam. But that's a misnomer because very few people for the February bar exam, and there may be some folks who were like me, who were privileged enough and lucky enough to have a spouse or a partner or a friend or a family member who could support them while they studied full time. This is not true for everybody. And it's especially not true for folks who are retaking, who might have already used all the goodwill of their friends and family the first time around, and now are having to make do with whatever little bits of studying they can. So for those of you who are taking the bar exam for the second time, and for those of you who are not able to study full time right now, how do you use your time most effectively? Well, the first thing that you have to do is be absolutely 100% realistic about what you actually can achieve in the next 8 days. Number one, you cannot at this point in time cram new rules of law into your brain. What you need to be doing now is working through the study materials you've already assembled, whether that be flashcards that you've made, one sheets, synthesized outlines, any study materials that you typically use for retention of material. This is the time to just focus on reviewing those things. This is not the time to make new flashcards. This is not the time to make new outlines. This is not the time to purchase new study aids. You do not have time for that. What we need to do now is basically triage. So we're at the emergency room stage of the bar exam right now. And right now we have to look at the patient and we have to determine what's most important and what can we worry about later. So you've got a patient on the table, they're bleeding out, they've got a gun wound, they also have HPV. We're not worried about any potential issues with potential like anal warts or something popping up right now. We're trying to stop the bleeding because the HPV is completely irrelevant. Now, why do I make a graphic analogy like this when we're talking about the bar exam? Your bar prep right now is bleeding out, especially if you have not been able to spend much time during the week studying. There are a lot of folks I know right now who are in this boat, where they maybe were able to do a couple hours of studying during the day. Maybe they weren't able to study at all during the week and they've had to cram it into weekends. There are some folks out here who have not been able to purchase or were not able to get a free retake. And so they have been just working from books and they have not been able to practice using the materials that would be provided through Kaplan, Themis, Barbary, Quimby, what have you. And there are also folks who literally maybe were able to eke out a week of bar prep, and that is literally all they've got. So these are the folks whose bar prep is literally bleeding out on the table. And you have to make very crucial real-time assessments of what you absolutely have to do. because we only have 8 days left, and technically really only 7, and really kind of only 6, because I don't recommend that people study the day before the bar exam. We'll talk about that later, but I don't recommend that you do that. It causes a lot of problems, and really that day should be set aside for trying to maintain some mindfulness and get all the logistics sorted out so that you're ready to go on the day. But as far as when your bar prep is basically lying on a table bleeding out, well, what does that look like? It looks like somebody who hasn't submitted a single essay for grading, has not done any full-length timed MPTs, or has mostly just been reading outlines or doing flashcards and maybe have not been doing any practice questions, or you're only doing a handful of practice questions. What can you reasonably do when you have a limited amount of time to study and we are pretty much past the cramming stage? I know a lot of people think that this last week is really for cramming. It isn't really, because you do not have the time to put new information into your brain, to have it be settled in and turned into long-term memory that you can then easily recall from. You don't have the time, and your brain, you're too stressed out. You're maybe not getting enough sleep. You're working hard. You're exhausted, and studying while you're tired. It's something you can push through, but sitting and staring at an outline or staring at flashcards and not doing active review is not going to get you where you need to be. So what we need to do is we need to make the best of what we actually have, which means any flashcards you've already made, those are the ones we're sticking to. We're not making any new ones. Any outlines you've already created or one sheets that you've made for yourself, we're sticking with those. We're not using new things. You do not have time at this point to learn a new subject. So if you haven't learned the rule against perpetuities, don't worry about it. Now is not the time. You're not going to learn it in a week. It's a waste of your time. All you need to do for something like that is to be able to recognize that this is the type of question that's happening. Put A, move on with your life. We don't have time for that. Anything outside of the core 7 MBE subjects that you haven't spent a lot of time on, we're not going to have time to sit and watch videos. Watch videos? No. Read a full outline? No. Anything that is you sitting passively doing something, even if it's just listening to a lecture, you cannot do that at this point in your studies. You don't have time, and it's not effective. So instead, what we have to do is we have to focus on what's most likely to be tested, make sure that you have a plan for that. And then with respect to the essay subjects like secured transactions, family law, wills and trusts, those sorts of things, those subjects, we're going to talk about strategies for how do you fake it. Because at this point, if you don't know something, you will not learn it by next week. Okay, I'm going to say that again for the people in the back. If you do not know something now, you will not know it by next week. It's not going to happen. So what I want you to start getting comfortable with is that discomfort. I want you to be comfortable with this feeling of, I don't know everything. Because number one, we've talked about this before in other videos. It's not the expectation that you know everything. It's not the expectation that you know torts inside and out and Civ Pro inside and out. You just have to know how they test those things and be able to give them something that approximates what they're expecting you to know, which is not 100% of the entirety of the federal rules of civil procedure. That's not the expectation, and it never was. So we do have to put an emphasis on the MBE subjects. Why is that? Because they're fair game for the MEE. Now, remember, a lot of people, part of the reason why they're unsuccessful in the bar exam is because they actually don't know what's tested. And you might think, but Kimber, that's crazy. If I'm I'm going to be an attorney, why wouldn't I know the rules? Why wouldn't I know everything that's tested? Believe me, it's a fact. I have talked to many a student a week before the bar exam who did not know exactly what was being tested or how. I know a lot of people. There are a lot of people out there who to this day probably think that the only essay subjects that they get are related to the MBE, or that the MBE subjects are not tested in the essays. It happens, okay? But just know, those subjects are double tested. They will show up in the MBE, they will show up on the multi-state essay, and certain of those types of law will also show up in the MPT. So you really, really, really need to know those things, but you do not need to know all of the things about those things. So if you have not had time to really do a super review of absolutely everything, I'm going to give you the things you absolutely must have under your belt if you already have an underpinning on this. Now mind you, if you have not studied one of these subjects, we're going to have to talk about how to fake it, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But the people that I'm addressing now are people who have had an opportunity to do some studying. And remember, again, most of the MBE subjects, with the exception of evidence, tend to be something that everybody gets some kind of coverage in law school. So you do know a lot more about these subjects than you might think, especially if it's been a couple years since you had a contracts class. You still have an underpinning. You spent time studying those things, so you can review those in a way that you're not necessarily going to be able to secure transactions if you didn't have that course and you haven't spent much time doing practice questions or looking through your outlines heretofore. So let's just talk about the things that I think everybody should have a pretty good underpinning. And again, I know not everybody takes evidence. I know it's not a required class and a lot of people don't take it. And it's very difficult to learn evidence over the bar exam. But there is enough of an emphasis on evidence through the multi-state bar exam questions that you should have had enough exposure to it to kind of understand where we're coming from. So what are the absolute must-have, you gotta know this shit, subjects within each individual subject area? Let's start with contracts. About a third of the questions you're going to see on the multi-state bar exam are related to formation issues. Formation issues. That means, is there even a contract at all? So you're gonna need to be very comfortable with what even constitutes a contract. How do you determine whether or not there is a contract? What are the elements of a contract, and are they satisfied here? Article 2 stuff comes up. In essays a lot, the difference between common law and UCC2 rules with respect to service contracts and contracts for the sale of goods. Those are things you definitely will need to know. They love testing that kind of stuff, especially in an essay format. But formation, you really got to hit it, because if you don't even understand what a contract even is, it's going to be very difficult to determine whether or not the contract is valid or if it's been invalidated in some way. So focus on that. Con law. Let's talk about constitutional law. What is the number one thing they love to test in constitutional law questions? Well, the number one thing they love is equal protection. You're going to see that all over the place. You'll especially see that in the multi-state bar. They love testing equal protection. You got to know it backwards and forwards. Now, with respect to the other thing they love to test, it's the First Amendment. And I don't just mean freedom of speech. I mean, they like every single one of those clauses is fair game. Like Establishment Clause, they love testing that kind of stuff, especially with respect to whether or not you can have a high school club meeting in an auditorium if there's a religious element to it or something like that. They love that kind of stuff. Time, place, manner restrictions, those kinds of things come up very frequently with respect to these things. Freedom of the press, and basically freedom of speech, those things pop up a lot. So make sure that you're very, very clear on all of your First Amendment stuff and your equal protection stuff, and that's going to take you a long way to where you need to go. Let's talk about property. Property is the thing most people hate. And there's a reason, because it's boring and it sucks. And I know there's some real estate attorneys out there, or soon to be real estate attorneys, who think I'm crazy. But believe me, there's more of us out here who hate property than you know. And it is very difficult because a lot of it doesn't really make any sense unless you've actually been doing it. But the number one thing that they're going to test in property is going to be mortgages. So make sure you understand mortgages backwards and forward, that you know the difference between implied assumption of a mortgage, and the majority rule, which is taking subject to the mortgage. You might see this kind of thing pop up in an essay. Easements and covenants, obviously, that's the kind of thing that shows up a lot in MBE questions as well. But at the very least, an understanding of mortgages is going to help you out significantly on property. Now, what I want to let you know about property and how it manifests itself on the MBE is that most people on the day of the exam are only getting about half of these questions right on the day. So if you're scoring anywhere near 50% in your MBE questions with respect to property, you're fine. Don't worry about it too much. If you're getting above that, perfect. If property is a good subject for you, great. Keep working on it. But just know that it's not one of those things that people do very well. And that's a good segue. Let's talk about evidence. Evidence is a very difficult subject for people because a lot of people don't take it. And the people that do take it might not then take a trial advocacy course where you actually see how it works. It makes so much more sense in practice than in theory. And it can be very difficult coming from a theoretical approach, which is what a lot of people get reading case law instead of actually seeing it applied in a courtroom atmosphere. It can be very difficult to take it from theoretical to in practice. Which is why all of these hearsay exceptions and non-hearsay speech is so vital to understand. You got to know every single one of those exceptions. You really have to. Or at least the ones that pop up the most frequently, like present sense impression, dying declarations. They love to test all this crap. So those are the things I really want you to focus on. Relevance is another thing, whether or not a piece of evidence is even relevant and should be admitted based on that. Or is its probative value outweighed by its prejudicial effect? Those are things you need to think about every time you're approaching a evidence question. So let's talk about torts. There are two big things that torts is testing. Number one is negligence, and the other one is intentional torts. So hopefully you will have an understanding of most of the intentional torts and what their elements are and any affirmative defenses that are available for those torts. This is something that's very easy to have already got flashcards made. And it's a very easy thing that you can review very quickly because most of these torts only have 2 or 3 elements, maybe 4 at a maximum, but it's not as big of a deal as when we talk about crim, where you've got a whole bunch of different ways that criminal laws can be tested. So with respect to negligence, that's something that they absolutely love to test. And just know that when you get a negligence question that is in an essay format as opposed to a practice MBE question, you're likely going to be each sub question within a negligence question is going to be testing one of the elements of negligence. So the first part will really be dealing with duty. Is there a duty? To whom is a duty owed? Is there even a duty owed? Most of the time, the answer is going to be yes, there's some kind of a duty. What is it? Is it landlord tenant? Is it landowner trespasser? Like to whom is the duty owed? Causation, they absolutely expect you to understand both proximate and actual causation, and you have to be able to distinguish them and be able to apply the facts correctly. These are hugely important things. Whether or not there are damages, sometimes that comes up, but the more important things that they're almost always going to be testing are duty and causation. Those things come up a lot more than breach. I mean, yeah, was there a breach while I'm injured? So yeah, okay, there's a breach. But just be cognizant of the fact that this is something that gets tested a lot. It'll get tested in an essay. It'll get tested on multiple questions within the multi-state bar exam. You will see a lot of things happening like this. So let's talk about civil procedure. This is still a relatively new thing that's being tested on the multi-state bar exam. It didn't used to be, but civil procedure in general is the number one subject tested on the entire bar exam. You're 100% going to get it on the MBE, but they love testing it in essays. They absolutely love testing it. So you can almost be guaranteed to get one of these. So be ready. And that means understanding personal jurisdiction, subject matter jurisdiction. You'll occasionally see service of process questions pop up. 12b6 kind of stuff pops up a lot. Like you have to understand in what order are people waiving their 12b6 defenses by submitting to the jurisdiction because they didn't file their motions at the proper time. They love testing that kind of stuff. So be aware of how those rules work. I know one thing that a lot of students do is they get all bent out of shape about service of process, but even if somebody, remember, this is the kind of thing that needs to be brought up the first time you appear in court. Like if you're going to object to improper service of process or improper jurisdiction, you can't submit yourself to the jurisdiction by also filing an answer at the same time. At that point, all of the defenses are waived. You're in court now. It doesn't matter. These are the kinds of things that they love testing. So watch out for those. So did I get everything? We got evidence, torts, contracts, con law, property. I think we got everything. Crim. Oh, good Lord. Oh, criminal. So the thing about crim law is that, unfortunately, we're still testing common law and model penal code. Now, fortunately for the uniform bar exam, you don't have to know your own individual state's laws unless unfortunately you're in a state where they test it. But for the UBE, it's common law and model penal code. Those are the two things that you need to know. That does mean that you have to know the difference between common law murder and homicide for the model penal code. It's very, very important that you understand the common law elements of the crimes as well as any model penal code issues. Model penal code focuses a lot on mental states, and the questions that you're going to get heavily weigh on, is there the requisite mental state to even get a conviction on this crime? So you have to understand the various different mental states, the common law mental states, the inchoate crimes, all of those things. These are the kinds of things that it's very easy to drill using flashcards or a one sheet. And hopefully you've had some exposure to these kinds of things, because it's imperative that you know the elements of these crimes, because a lot of these essay questions are going to hinge on understanding the requisite mental state and whether or not a jury could convict based on whether or not they had the requisite mental state. And that comes in a lot with intentional homicide versus reckless homicide or negligent homicide. One pro tip: do not, if you get a question where it's negligent homicide, do not conflate this with a tort. I've seen it happen too many times where people will put these are the elements of negligent homicide: duty, breach, causation, damages. No. Don't do that. Don't ever do that. You will get a 0 or a 1 out of 6, which is essentially the same thing. So do not do that. Make sure that you are clear on why something is a negligent or a reckless homicide as opposed to a negligence in civil practice, what is basically a tort. So these are the things you really have to know, the elements and the defenses for every one of these crimes. Now is the time to really be drilling these things. Okay, these are very important things to have under your belt. So we've talked about what are the basics that you absolutely have. What do you do if I don't know secured? And there's a lot of you out there who, for whatever reason, either didn't take secured, got super scared of it the last time you took the bar exam, or you just decided to throw up your hands and hope for the best. Well, with secure transactions, it basically comes down to collateral. Who has the right to it? So when I was taking secure transactions in law school, we had the craziest exam ever. It was basically a 6-hour exam administered over 3 hours, unfortunately. And it was literally a circus went bankrupt, and every potential kind of collateral you could have in the entire world was implicated in this question. What about the elephants? What about the fixtures? What about the tents? What about the vehicles? What about the cash in the box office? What about the monkeys? Like, who owns those guys? What about like any of the specialized equipment? Like, can we sell it to Cirque du Soleil? Like, every single thing, it was treated in a different way. And then you have issues of priority, super priority, and whether or not people filed their financing statements correctly. So with secure transactions and any other subject area that wills, trusts, business organizations, corporations, and family law, these things are tested all the time, very, very frequently. I know people at this point start freaking out, like, what about admin? And what about conflicts? And what about tax law and everything? These are fair game, but you don't have time to learn them. If you haven't spent any time learning admin, conflicts, or any of these other subject areas that are less frequently tested but technically fair game, forget it. You're not going to learn it now. Don't waste your time. It's not worth your time to spend half a day trying to learn a subject that's very complex and difficult when the likelihood is by this time next week, all that it's going to do is take away from time that you could be using to finesse and to create a stronger foundation for the subjects that you have more strengths in. Because at this point, it's going to become a numbers game, and we have to figure out where can we add some points, because we know we're going to fail a couple essays for sure. It's going to happen. I mean, it happens to pretty much everybody, but at this point, you have to think about being strategic and failing something on purpose using this technique. It's called a script. Create a script. You are an actor on a stage pretending that you're a lawyer who understands everything about family law. Now, here's a pro tip for me, because even though, ironically, I've started doing family law because everybody's getting divorced in the pandemic, and that's great for business, I did not know any of these things. And I did get a family law question that was some kind of crazy combination of conflicts of law and Civ Pro with family law. It was insane. It was crazy. I didn't know what was going on, and I just put whatever's in the best interest of the child. So family law, something best interest of the child, figure it out, make it up. There are a lot of rules. There's definitely, there's like the Uniform Child Support Act. There's all kinds of various things that you're expected to know. And I definitely would recommend the best thing that you can do now for the fake it till you make it creating of a script is to just look at all of the essays that you possibly can find and figure out what is it that they tend to be testing. Because let's remember, the National Conference of Bar Examiners are not creative people. I mean, they're creative in the sense that they think it's cool for us to take a bar exam when they never took one, but that's a different rant for a different day. They're not creative in the sense that they're constantly changing how they test these things. Now, I know that it might seem, if you took it in the fall and you take it now, it's going to seem different to you. But overall, looking back on 30 years of these essays, which, having worked in bar prep, I've seen how things kind of progress. They don't test these things in a remarkably different way from year to year. They tend to use the same types of fact patterns, the same types of approaches, so that you now, going through the practice essays that you have access to, can determine what are the patterns. What are they? How, like, what are the 3 or 4, maybe 5 or 6 types of questions that you're getting? So what you need to do is sit down today and look at the subjects that you feel like you've got a good underpinning on. And hopefully those are your MBE subjects, since most of us taken all these things. And then turn back to the areas where you haven't spent the time. Is it corporations? Is it family law? Whatever. And then I want you to sit down either with your book or go online, and I want you to use whatever filter you have in your student portal to just filter out those specific essays, or look at a frequency chart. I know Kaplan and some other, and Barbary as well, I believe, but many of the bar prep companies, they do the work for you. They've already created in your student portal some kind of a frequency chart to tell you which subject areas get tested and what are the subtopics that you're most frequently. I mean, they go into these granular details. So what I want you to do is have an idea of, okay, they like to use this type of a fact pattern to test. Let's say we're talking about corporations, and we're talking about disassociation from the LLC or something like that, or from the LLP. They will typically have similar fact patterns for that. So what I want you to do over the next couple days is literally sit down with whatever materials you have and go through as many essays, and try to go through them all if you can. Believe me, you still have time. If you're working, you will have less time to do this, but it's still going to be beneficial to, instead of sitting and just trying to read an outline, it's much more beneficial to go through and read an outline. Like, when I say outline, I mean do the full IRAC on each of these essays and figure out what types of fact patterns are showing up. Because what you're then going to do is you're going to construct a script that you can literally just vomit up. This is literally take some of the language from the practice question answers. Now remember, you do not want to be doing it word for word because it's too much to memorize. You just need to be kind of remembering the most important parts. Maybe if you can put it in your own words as short and concisely as you can. but literally create a little thing. Like, if I see this type of fact pattern, I know the issue here is whether a partner can dissociate doing blah, blah. And then the rule is a partner dissociates from a partnership by doing yada, yada. And here, facts, facts, facts for why the partner didn't or didn't do the thing they were supposed to do. Conclusion, they didn't do it right. So they didn't dissociate. So you're going to memorize the script. You're not going to worry about sitting here doing flashcards for these subjects. You don't have time. Your flashcard for this subject is going to be, what if I do if I get this type of fact pattern? And then you just vomit that script up. It can be an outline. It can be bullet points, whatever works for you. It can be a flow chart that you make. And especially for these types of questions, flowcharts are great because, like, if this, then this, then this, then this, and then you can just vomit that up. But I think at this point, the time for making flowcharts is past. The time for sitting down and making flashcards has passed. What you have time to do now is make a script and act like, remember, like, when Kevin Spacey got fired from a movie and they had to bring Christopher Plummer in and he had like a week to learn everything about this role? That's you right now. You're not Kevin Spacey. You're Christopher Plummer. You're coming in late and you have a week and they're going to start shooting next week and you better be ready. So learn your lines, literally. You're not a lawyer, but you play one at the bar exam. That's what I want you to do. Okay. So we talked about scripts. We talked about how are we preparing to just minimize our exposure so that we're just studying what absolutely is crucial. What about when you don't have time? That's a lot of you. You have family commitments. You have work commitments. You just don't have a lot of time on your plate. How do you use your time most effectively? So for those of you out there who are looking down the barrel of this exam and wondering how the hell am I going to make it? Because laws, I don't know the laws. Well, you do, first of all. You need to first turn your brain frown upside down and realize you know more than you think. I will never stop saying this. People come in here saying, I don't know anything. I don't know the rules. I don't know the laws. Yes, you do. You know a lot more than you think you do. I'm not saying that you're an expert. I'm not saying that you could come into a courtroom and argue in front of a judge. No, I'm not saying any of those things. What I'm saying is you have knowledge in your brain that you are not able to access because you are afraid and you are anxious and you are stressed. And we've said this many, many times before when we talk about trusting your gut. Your gut is not really some kind of innate thing. Your gut is your mind, unbound by fear. This week is the dark night of the soul. You're going to go through a roller coaster of emotions. You're going to feel like crying, screaming, shouting, punching, murdering. All the feelings are going to happen. Worthlessness, depression, lack of motivation, hunger. You're going to feel every feeling and some new ones that have just been invented, apparently. We're going to be feeling every single feeling in the world and sometimes all at once. The only way for you to have a good idea of what you need to accomplish is to be able to quiet your mind. And I know that is easier said than done. It's very easy for me to say that because I ain't the one that got to take the test. But for those of you who are looking down the barrel of this gun and wondering, do I even have the ammo? You do. You do. If we're using this gun analogy, which I don't really like to do, but if we're using the gun analogy, the reason that you can't shoot your shot is because you got the safety on. And that safety, again, that's your fear, blocking your mind, blocking your ability to focus. So now is the absolute time. You have to start taking time every single day. It should be one of the first things that you do. If you're looking into the mirror or you're just laying in the bed doing it, I want you to sit and think, I am competent. I can do this. And I want you to sit, and even if it's 5 minutes, I want you to just think of yourself in 5 years. What does that look like? You're walking into your dream job. Is it the public defender's office? Is it the state's attorney's office? Is it a legal aid organization? Is it a government office? Is it a big law firm, mid-sized firm, solo practitioner? Are you going to start your own firm? What does that look like? How are you dressed? What does your office look like? Who's working for you? See yourself going to court. If you're not somebody who wants to do litigation, see yourself sitting at your desk and just writing all the best briefs you've ever written. I want you to think about what lawyer you looks like. Who is that person? And see their confidence, see their passion, see their ability to do the job that all of the stuff that we're talking about today has led to. That person is who you want to be. And I want you to think about who that person is and realize it's been you all along. That person has been in you all along, but you need to let that person come out. Because until you are confident in yourself and your abilities, you're not going to be able to get through this wall of fear. And I know for most people, especially those of you who have been working full-time, have not been able to take any days off, who have really been struggling with the pandemic, let alone all of this other stuff, you really feel like you haven't done anything. You have barely scratched the surface. It's just not true. It's just not true. You've put in a full law school experience. You've put in all the time and effort, and some of you have literally been studying for the bar exam for like a year now. You've been putting in so much time and effort. There's so much in your mind that could just be unlocked if you can trust in yourself and get through the fear and the anger. So this week, it's going to be so important for you to figure out ways that you can quiet and calm your mind. And even if that's like, and I'm not one of these woo-woo goop Gwyneth Paltrow people who thinks that like I can shove a rock up my snatch and suddenly we're all going to be like learning about the spirits and I'm going to open up all these mysteries of life. No, nobody's doing anything like that. We're literally maybe looking at some YouTube videos on how to create mindfulness or watching yoga with Adriene. There's so many things that you can do. There's very inexpensive meditation and or mindfulness apps that you can download that will take you through a guided meditation. And again, I'm not saying this because I'm trying to start a cult. By the way, if you want me to, very happy to, please send me 50% of your income and we'll get started with that. But until such time as I start assigning all the sashes and giving people their badges and telling them, what all the secrets of our cult are, we're just going to be dealing with trying to figure out the cheapest, most inexpensive way that is effective for you to calm the fuck down. Because right now, you guys aren't calm. You guys are freaking out. And that's normal, natural, and to be expected. All of these feelings are normal, natural, and to be expected. Pandemic, not normal or natural. What's going on in America, not normal or natural. Snowpocalypse 2021, more normal for me in Chicago. Louisiana, no, not normal. Texas, definitely not normal. So we got a lot of stuff going on. That's why you need to be in a place where you can divorce your rational mind from your emotional, psychological needs right now, because we do not have time to feel feelings. We just don't have time to feel them. You can acknowledge them and watch them go through until you can feel them later, but we don't have time to feel feelings this week. We really don't. That's why it's so important to figure out how can you start your day in a way that's going to push through the fear and the lack of motivation. Now, it's a pandemic. I don't have to tell you this. You all know we're coming up on our 1st-year anniversary. And in fact, in less than a month, I will have my 1-year anniversary since the last time I set foot in a law office I've been in a court, but I've been in court twice. And only because we have to work on paper in Cook County for criminal. It's great. That's another argument for another time. But the pandemic has shown a lot of us how when our interconnectedness breaks down and we're isolated and every day is the same. And we've made a lot of Groundhog Day jokes, but even in Groundhog Day, they could go out and you could do new different things every day. Like you could have adventures every day that were somewhat different. We can't even do that. Every day is the same. Everything is the same. Nothing changes. Everything sucks. So it's very hard to get motivated when you wake up in the morning and you're just like, more of this shit I gotta do? Yeah. So that's why it's important to look at when it comes to lack of motivation, I'm right there with you. Why am I doing this? Because I have some petitions for dissolution of marriage that I really don't want to do. That's why. Are you making bread right now instead of studying for the bar exam? You know who you are. Are you watching some videos on YouTube that right now? Yes, you are. At least this is tangentially related to the bar exam as opposed to like the other YouTube videos you could be watching, which is like, what's going on with WandaVision? We don't know. There are so many ways to not do the work. Okay, my dog is saying hello. There are so many ways to not do the work. So there are a few simple techniques that you can employ to get your motivation back. And it comes down to breaking things down into their component parts so that you can just check things off a checklist. Now, making a checklist can sound scary to people, but literally what I mean is wake up, make bed, make breakfast, make coffee, kiss spouse or partner, walk dog. I literally want you to break down your day into all the component parts so that you can get that little dopamine hit when you check something off your list. This is how you get more motivation. Literally getting up and making your bed first thing in the morning can set you up for success. Humans are weird. It's a psychological thing, but starting the day with some modicum of order is going to help you impose the order that you need on your life as opposed to letting things happen to you. So literally, that's what you need to do. And the same thing goes for bar prep. So wake up, make bed, make breakfast, walk dog, open computer, turn on Barbary, turn on Kaplan, turn on Themis, turn on Adaptabar, turn on Quimby, turn on your school's own bar prep. Look at your overall MBE performance. Do 10 question quiz. Like literally plot everything out in detail and check off each thing on the list as you're doing it. And just the mere action of checking things off your list is going to give you a sense of satisfaction. It's going to give you that dopamine hit. You're going to feel better about your life and your choices, and you're going to move forward. You're going to get more done. So that's one technique that I have for, I don't want to study because I have to know all the things. That's why it's so important to just come correct and just get your brain. It's go day. We don't have time to think about bullshit. And I know a lot of us are on a lot of different kinds of bullshit right now, but you need to get off the bullshit and get back onto the bar exam express because right now it's going hog wild right now, and it's careening towards its final destination. So these are things that you need to work on. We've got our scripts, we've got our mindfulness, we've got our making checklists. But now, how should we organize our time? Because I know some people have a full week to study. Some people might have an hour or two each night and then the weekend to study. What is the best use of your time? I'm going to say this twice, but I'm going to say it first now. Practice, practice, practice. And I'm going to say it again. Practice, practice, practice. If you are not actively using the information that you have thus far crammed into your skull, it doesn't matter. Moving forward, okay, let's talk about what's really the big elephant in the room here, which is your bar prep company's prescribed final week schedule. Every single company out there has come up with their version of a prescribed schedule that you should be doing going forward. Now, some of these companies will be like, hey, how many hours do you want to study? And then you'll be like, oh, I'm going to do all the things. Okay, 16 hours. And then they're going to give you 52 million tasks to complete. Or they're just giving you a mimeographed copy of some schedule that has been moving around the internet for the last 20 years. What you need to know about these schedules is they are to cover the asses of the bar prep companies because they are too full. They are too expansive. They're too inclusive, and they're too much. They give you more tasks than you know that you can complete because they don't want to be called out. They don't want people to come back and say, hey, Barbary, but you didn't tell me on the Thursday before the bar exam I should spend 3 hours studying conflicts. So they add 3 hours of conflicts prep in there. They do these things specifically so nobody can come at them and say, you didn't tell us, though, because we told you. Now, my good friend and law school buddy, who's really, this, if you want to give some credit to this person, because a lot of the wisdom that I'm sharing with you came from this man when he was struggling through the bar exam, and he was the one that was teaching himself echolocation doing the bar exam and shaving his head and buying 42 million cherries and just losing his damn mind. He gave me some of the most invaluable advice, because I literally, and I have this on video, and at some point I'll actually put it up for you guys to see. It will be triggering, so there will be the attendant trigger warning. But I had a meltdown right around this time before the bar exam, when I only had like 11 days, 10 days to study, maybe even fewer days than that. I had a complete and utter meltdown. I just began laughing hysterically and crying and laughing hysterically and just losing my mind. And partially this was attributable to the Barbary schedule that I was looking at. And every day it was like 12 hours. It was insane. There was so much stuff in that schedule that I just looked at it and I just burst into tears, and I just started hysterically crying and cry laughing and basically melting into a puddle of human goo. And my friend was like, why are you using that schedule though? And I said, because they said I had to use it or I'll fail. Ah! And he said, look, if you make your own schedule, you can take back your power. And you can determine what needs to be done. You have a better understanding of what your strengths and weaknesses are. There is no one size fits all way to use your final week of bar prep study. Some people are going to go much harder on MBE. Some people are going to go much harder on MEE. Some people are going to spend 3 days on the MPT. It doesn't matter, because there's not one way. Everybody needs to determine for themselves. This is like a ruby slippers kind of thing. And you don't necessarily figure this out until sometimes it's too late. And I know a lot of people, unfortunately, will not realize until after they've taken the bar exam that they studied incorrectly, or that they focused on the wrong things, or they spent their time not as effectively or efficiently, or they spent way too much time on something that they thought was important, but they didn't realize it really wasn't all that important. So what I want you to do is I want you to sit down and think about, what time do you actually have to study? What time do you actually think you'll be able to study? Because especially for those of you who are working full time, a couple hours at night seems like not a big ask. But believe me, it's 6 o'clock. You've been staring at like 14 Zoom meetings during the day. You've been on calls. You've been online all day. It's so stressful and tiring. And by the time you get to dinner, you're going to sit down at 7 o'clock and be like, okay, let's study for 3 hours. It's unlikely that you'll be able to do that. And that is why I recommend, if you're working full time and you're able to, try and shift some of your studying to the morning before you start. Now, this is the time of year that a lot of employers, especially legal employers, they understand the bar exam is now, and they might be have more wiggle room for you. So if you haven't spoken with your employer, now is the time to ask, can I shift some of my time? Can I log in at noon instead of at 9? Can I shift my hours? Can I front load? Can I back load? Ask if there are some ways that you can change your schedule if you don't have to go in person. And I know some of you actually are still like working retail jobs or working in food service to make money. And it's very difficult. You can't really take shifts off because you need the money, even if you could get somebody to cover. So in the case where you are doing shift work and you have an afternoon shift, you're going to want to do your studying before you go to work, because coming back from retail, good Lord, I mean, I couldn't even imagine trying to sit down and study torts after I want to commit 42 different torts against all these customers. So now is the time, to the extent that you can, to try and shift your studying to early morning. And even if it's like 7 to 9, get up a little bit early. You need to be able to function at 9 o'clock in the morning for the bar exam. So now is the time to, when you're fresh and it's the first thing in the morning, you're going to have a better time than if you try and study at night. Because remember, the more tired you are, the more stressed you are, the less likely you're going to be able to actually recall things that you cram into your brain during that time. So now's the time to try and get as much help as you can with some wiggle room, rescheduling things. If you're still able to work in the evening, that's great. But I think you're best served if you have evening time to just really do practice questions. So one day do like maybe spend an hour doing, 33 practice MBEs. And the reason I say 33 is because that's about how many you're expected to do in an hour on the actual exam. And then maybe try and read or outline 2 essays if all you have is 2 hours. If you have 3 hours, then spend 2 hours doing practice MBE questions and spend an hour doing the questions and an hour reviewing and going over them and trying to figure out what mistakes that you've made. And with respect to essays, I know there's a lot of folks out here who have not submitted any essays for grading at this point. You all know who you are. And a lot of you think this is a great strategy because I'm going to wait until the final week and I'm going to spend all of the Monday before doing all the essays that I possibly can. Well, this is a bad strategy. I mean, you should have been doing them the whole time. If you haven't, no use crying over ungraded essays. But if you haven't turned in any essays for grading, now is the time to at least turn in a couple, because usually they'll stop accepting questions. Usually the Friday before the bar exam is like the last date that you can submit. So if you do not know what the last date is to submit essays for grading, do it now. But you should not be submitting essays for grading the Friday before the bar exam anyway, because by the time you get it back, it's going to be a day before the bar. And if you do poorly, it's going to tank your confidence. So the only reason to turn in essays now is if you still have time to remediate. So if there's a couple subjects that you have essays that you can submit and you haven't done them yet and you're concerned about them, like a torts question or an evidence question, do them now and submit them for grading, and then hopefully you'll have some time for remediation. But at this point, you really don't have time to waste on getting essays graded because there's really no time to remediate. So if you have issues with issue spotting, there's not much we can do at this point. So better to know that you have issues with issue spotting now, but to some extent, I kind of feel like ignorance is bliss when it comes to this. Like last week was really the time to get all your final essays in. This week is not the week to be turning essays in because number one, you're going to get an essay that you're not going to pass and you're going to freak out. Or it'll take so long to get your answer back that it's essentially futile enterprise anyway. So what I would recommend is that if you haven't submitted any essays for grading at this point, don't worry about it. I just don't think there's time to do it, and it's not worth it. Today, which is Monday, the 15th of January, would be the last time I would recommend that you send something in, because you should get your grade back within a couple days, and then you might be able to do something, but I still feel like you need to make the call whether or not getting a bad grade from an essay 4 days before the bar exam is going to be bad for your confidence. I think you're much better off self-grading because you're not going to waste time sitting around, because believe me, I was there. I have been one of you. I've been sitting right where you are. And I'm that person who would turn in an essay, 3 days before the bar exam and be like, well, I don't have to do any practice essays now because I'm going to wait until I get that information back from them about what I did wrong. And then, of course, I freak out because I get a 2 out of 6. So this is not the time that you want to expose yourself to any possibility that you're going to sink your confidence, right? Because certain things you don't have time to fix. If you're bad at issue spotting, there's not much we can do at this point. It's too late. I mean, this is a skill that really needs to be honed over months and months and years. It's not something that you can just pick up over a week. If your main issue is that you don't know what the rules of law are, well, that's fine, because most people are still in this boat. I can tell you that I had something like, I don't know, between 800 and 1200 flashcards. I made so many flashcards I couldn't even tell you, but I kept making the flashcards, but I wasn't reviewing them in earnest until the week before the bar. That's when I was really refreshing and refining. And again, remember, this last week is about refreshing and refining. It is not about learning a new subject of law. You can't do it. You can't do it. You're not going to learn admin this week. You're not going to learn Fed tax. You're not going to learn conflicts. You're not going to learn any subject that you haven't spent significant time on. You can refine and you can finesse the subjects that you have had exposure to. And we know that most of the MBE subjects you will have had exposure to. So you're refining and finessing and you're making sure that you know the basic stuff. But the other things, you just have to figure out how to fake it. Because all you have time for, if you don't understand conflicts, is to read and outline as many conflicts essays as you can, figure out what types of fact patterns they show, and get yourself a script that you can vomit up. You do have time to remember some scripts. I mean, that was basically me in commercial paper. I know commercial paper isn't tested now, but I never took the class. I didn't understand it. So I just read every commercial paper problem that I could find. I outlined every single one, and then I came up with like three. I mean, basically I learned about the holder in due course rule because that's the thing that comes up the most. And I just had a couple fact patterns that I remembered, and I just vomited. I was ready to vomit some stuff up. Although in my test, neither UCC3 or UCC9 showed up, so it was completely pointless, but I did it. So as you look toward how to make the best use of this week, it's just really important that you're prioritizing above everything else active practicing. And when I say active, I mean even using your flashcards as active. You're standing up, you're walking around the room, you're pacing around the room, you're saying the things out loud. I don't care if you feel embarrassed, because we don't have time to feel those feelings right now. We can feel those feelings later. We don't have time to think about it. We'll think about it tomorrow. So I want you to be 100% active. If you prefer using outlines, then I want you to stand up. And I want you to be, if you're reciting them, I want you to say it out loud. I want you to sing it. I want you to rap it. I want you to do whatever you can to make it easier for you to recall these things. And pairing kinetic energy and vocalizing with looking at flashcards, it's going to activate more parts of your brain so you have a better chance of recalling it. Sitting at your desk and just flipping through without saying anything, or just being like bloop, 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 is not as helpful as being like, okay, intentional infliction of emotional distress. These are the elements. These are the defenses. I'm saying it. I'm singing it. I'm rapping it. I'm dancing it. And then I'm moving on. But try and be as active as possible. If you absolutely have no motivation to do anything, I find that it's easier to do MBE problems than anything else. That's my own personal affinity. When I couldn't face doing any essays, I would just sit and try and do as many MBE problems as I could. Because ultimately, what we need to do is we need to figure out where to triage. And you can go into, if you have bar prep right now, I'm confident that every single bar prep company has some kind of a way for you to monitor what your overall performance is and to go into granular detail. I know Kaplan has it. I'm pretty sure Themis has it. But you can go into the chart and see, okay, I've done however many torts questions. Within those torts questions, this many negligence, this many intentional torts, this many products liability questions, and what's my overall performance. So what you need to do when you're doing your triage over this next couple days, and you should really have your triage sorted out by tomorrow, which is Tuesday the 16th. That is the deadline for having that is the deadline for having all your shit sorted out, really, and figuring out what you need to attack. So we want to know what are your top subjects and your bottom subjects. So the reason that I want you to be clear on what is your top subject is because you just want to maintain. So if you're doing 85% in torts, that is fantastic. You just need to maintain. Don't worry about that. If you're at 55%, we need to figure out where the issue is. And if the issue is negligence, you need to get on that. And you need to be doing as many negligence questions as possible. You need to be doing targeted review in the areas where you need to finesse your performance. So instead of just like, I'm just going to do all the questions. No, we need to figure out specifically what are the issues that you're having. And if you're having issues in the most frequently tested areas, which would be negligence and intentional torts, you need to do more practice in those areas. If your issue is you don't understand products liability, I'm less concerned with that. I mean, it's possible that you could see that pop up in an essay question. They do occasionally do that, or it might be an element of a bigger torts question. Make a script. Like I'm saying, like if you don't have time to really learn this from scratch, make a script so that you can vomit something up if you get a question like that. But it's very important for you to know what subtopics within each subject area are you struggling with. So like I said, evidence and property, most people only get about 50% correct. If you're at the 50% level right now, just make sure that your top things are evidence and in evidence are hearsay and relevance, and your top things in property are mortgages and like easements and covenants, because those are the things that get tested the most, right? So when we're thinking about that granular detail, when you go into your bottom two subjects, I want to know, why are they your worst subjects? Is it that you just have issues with the entire subject area? Because I know some people are just like, I don't understand Civ Pro, or like, con law's really, I had a weird teacher and we only talked about equal protection. We never talked about First Amendment. I know some people don't talk about First Amendment in their con law classes. It happens. They have to take a separate class or something to get that. So it can be very challenging. So what I'm telling you now is, if you're having issues with con law and it's related to First Amendment, you need to get that sorted. And you need to make sure that when you're making your quizzes, and I know pretty much all of these bar prep companies have this ability, go in and tailor your quizzes to your specific weaknesses. So you're getting as many questions in your weaker areas so you can refine that. Because ultimately, while you can pass the MBE with about 55% correct overall, ideally I'd like to see you at 65. And any higher that you can get over 65, so much the better, because that's going to give you that room for a buffer. Now, some people really excel on the multiple choice, and that does give you the ability to like not be as worried about the essays, because that gives you some leeway to straight up outright fail a couple essays. And at this point, you have to be strategic like that. That's what I did the last week of the bar exam. I made a strategic decision. I'm not studying admin or tax or conflicts. I don't have time and I don't care. And even if I get one of those questions, I'm going to make something up and I'm going to move on with my life, because I was already because basically I hated studying for the bar exam so much that I really avoided doing essays as much as I possibly could. So I would sit and do 100 MBE questions a day. I could not bring myself to do full-on MPTs or sit and write out an essay timed with closed book. I couldn't bring myself to do it. So I just got really good at the MBE, and I was at about 85% correct with the ability to do a question in about 42 seconds. That is not the expectation for you, and it's not the expectation for most people. I'm just a gunner, and that's how I rolled. But that gave me the ability to probably straight up fail 3 of the 6 essays that I did. And I'm pretty sure I definitely failed that family law question. I'm really sure I failed the corporations question for sure. Like, there's definitely a couple questions I know I failed straight out. I know I failed straight out. And that buffer is what got me over. So you need to be 100% honest with yourself. Is your essay game tighter than your MBE, or is your MBE game tighter than your essays? If your MBE game is tight, you want to up the ante. Do many more MBE questions. And if you're already like at 60 or 65%, now you can cream off the gravy. Do more questions in the subtopics in your top areas that you haven't really focused on. So if you're getting 70% correct in torts, now you have time to do more products liability questions. If you're, however, getting 20% correct in, individual rights, which is what we call First Amendment and stuff like that. If you're only getting 20% of your individual rights questions, you're going to have to hit those really hard. So now is the time to really, you have to make use of every single one of the tools in your bar prep quiver, because a lot of people do not spend the time really digging into their portal, because just to log into Barbary or Kaplan or Themis or whatever hurts your heart so much and causes so much anxiety that you just can't bring yourself to do it. Well, you got to get past that now. You got to move through that because they have so many good tools in there for you to use. There's so many ways that you can find out and diagnose what your problems are. And you can't expect a doctor to cure you if you don't know what the symptoms are. And a lot of you really right now, you don't know what the symptoms are because your approach is scattershot because you haven't had time to really focus on it. So you have to look at your overall MBE score, figure out what your top and bottom performers are, finesse the top ones, and really hit hard on the most likely to be tested subtopics so you can really boost that up. You want every single subject area to be at least at 55%. And some of them are going to, I'm not talking in the aggregate, I mean every single individual one should be knowing that evidence and property people are probably only going to get about 50% on the day. But if you can bump that up to 55, you're already above average, okay? Remember, perfection at this point is not possible. It never has been. And for people who feel unable to get motivated or paralyzed because they feel like they have to do it perfectly or not at all, you have to just bust that up right now. Breakthrough, it is a lie. The bar exam is not about perfection. The bar exam is not about being a gunner and getting every single thing right and getting every question right. And I've seen a lot of people on Twitter, on Facebook, across all sorts of social media platforms, like, I only got 75% right on my last quiz. Yes, and that's fucking phenomenal. And this is not the time. Number one, don't be that douchebag out there like, oh my God, I only got 85% right. That is a douchey thing to say because there are people out here who are still struggling with 45%, with 45% correct across the board. And that is not acceptable. It is not acceptable right now during this week. If you are that person out there whining about how I only got 5 questions with 5 out of 6 points. Like, don't do that. Don't do that. This is not the time. First of all, get off social media this week. You don't have time for that crap. Unless there's actually somebody that you're following, like a tutor or somebody who's giving good tips. Otherwise, get off social media because there's too many people out here right now who are trying to sabotage you by lying about how well or how poorly they're doing so they can feel better about themselves. Social media is not your friend right now. Get off it. And tell all your friends and family that you will not be available because you don't have time to look at what other people are doing and comparing yourself. This is a plague and a scourge, and so many people succumb to the negativity that comes from seeing all these people out here talking about how great they're doing, especially if they were that guy in your law school class who there's no way that this dude who barely scraped by with a D in contracts suddenly is getting 85% of these questions right. No, it's not true. It's not happening. So just know that anything that anybody says on social media is probably a lie in some way. Even those of you who truly think you're making a truthful statement, you're really not. It's impossible to be truthful on social media with respect to the bar exam. It won't happen. Don't do it. Don't say douchey things and don't believe douchey things that are said on social media because it's all just a bunch of hot air. You don't have time for that right now. You should be doing practice problems or diagnosing what your issues are. That's what you need to be doing. So with respect to how should I be apportioning my time though, it's all going to depend on what your strengths and weaknesses are, which is why you really have to take a lot of time to diagnose what are those issues. So that means spending the time looking through all the MBE prep that you're doing, figuring out what your top and bottom are, and then starting to create quizzes that are going to enhance the finesse your high achieving subjects and that are going to really hammer in on the most frequently tested stuff for the subjects where you're not doing so great. With respect to essays, now is the time to be reading and outlining as many essays as you possibly can. Now, should you be doing full-length essays timed closed book? Yes, you should. Is it feasible to do that when you're limited? Now, here's the thing. If you're working full-time and you only have a couple hours during the day, maybe an hour in the morning or an hour at night, you really don't have time to just be doing closed book time things. Unless timing is an issue for you. So if timing is an issue for you, you absolutely need to be doing timed closed book essays. if timing is not an issue for you, then reading and outlining, I would rather you read and outline 4 essays in an hour than do 1 or 2 full-length closed book essays in an hour. Because really, the key to succeeding on the bar exam is to be able to effectively eye-rack. And that comes down to, do you have the muscle memory of eye-racking in your soul? You got to feel it. I had a really great legal writing professor who would say, you got to feel it. You just got to feel it. And if you can't feel it, you're not going to be able to succeed. So I need you to be able to feel the IRAC, the issue. How do I know what the issues are? I need you to really be focusing on your issue spotting. Make sure, and I've got other videos on issue spotting, so definitely take a look at those. I've got another video I made on how to deal with the MBE, how to issue spot, how to IRAC your way to success. But just know that if you're not already spending time reading and outlining as many essays as you can, now is the time. Because that's what's going to help you manage your time on the day of the exam. That's what's going to help you focus on what's important. And that's what's going to ensure that you're going to get as many points as possible. Because a lot of people who think they're outlining, y'all ain't outlining. You're scratching some questions down maybe, or you're mistakenly thinking that the question that you get in the question prompt is the question is the issue instead of a way to help you narrow your focus. Remember, when you're approaching these essays, these sub-questions that you get in your question prompt, that's not the issue. That is a way to show you sort of like you need to narrow your focus. This is where we want you to start looking for issues. And remember, on the MEE, they're only really giving you enough facts to make certain arguments. If you can't make the argument factually supported, it's the wrong argument. So a lot of you folks out here who think, I don't know any laws, I don't care. Because a lot of times you're focusing on the black letter rules of law. And let me tell you again, as I've said innumerable times, if you know every rule, let's say you have an eidetic memory and you can see every single rule of law in your outline, exactly how it was written. You know every single thing that you need to know, but you don't know how to issue spot, and you never really did. So all you're doing is vomiting up irrelevant rules of law that you're never going to get a passing score on because you're not answering the right question. That's why it's so important to focus on issue spotting above all. If you don't know what the issue is, you can't answer the question. And the question that you're supposedly answering is just a jumping off point. It's just a way to narrow your focus so you know what they want you specifically to talk about here. Oh, in this subtopic, they want me to talk about duty, but they're not saying that that's the issue. I have to say, oh, okay, the issue here is whether the university has a duty to the student living in the dorm as a tenant. That's the issue, and that's what I want you to focus on. So you really need to be focusing on reading and outlining all this week. Read and outline as many essays as you can. Do as many practice MBE problems as you can. And with respect to the how am I supposed to be getting these black letter law rules into my brain or refreshing them? Quick bursts of flashcards that you've already made. And I'm not talking about commercial flashcards. They've got too much information on them. I'm talking about the flashcards that you made that have one rule of law or one defense, or one crime, one common law crime, the elements of one common law crime, the defenses to one common law crime. Like I'm talking about very succinct. I'm not talking about an entire frickin' outline on one card. If you're that person, you may as well throw those cards away because they're useless right now. They're not helpful to you. But you don't have time to spend this week making 52 million flashcards and then thinking the 2 days before the bar exam that you're going to be able to put all that stuff in your brain. You need to be doing review every single day. And whether it's in the morning or at night or a little bit of both, every spare moment that you have, every coffee break, every lunch break. And again, remember, this is temporary. It's only one more week that you have. So I know it's tiring. I know it's discouraging when you really need a break from work, but your break is to sit down and study torts. It sucks, you guys, but this is what we're dealing with right now. You can make all these excuses. We can talk about how inequitable these things are. everything you're feeling is valid, but you just don't have time to feel those feelings, and we don't have time to make those arguments right now. The only argument we have time to make is whatever argument is in the essay question that we're attempting. So every minute you have, and literally people have the misapprehension that they need to be studying 62 hours a day to do justice to the bar exam. It's not true. You just need to be doing focused, effective studying as much as you can, even if it's only an hour or two a day. You can still get much more practice in if it's focused. So first thing when you get up, over breakfast, do 10 or 15 minutes of flashcards, or read through an outline really quick, or type or write out as many rules of law as you can remember, or get up on a whiteboard or a poster board or a piece of paper that you tape to the wall and just write out as many rules as you can, or write out your flow chart or your visualization, however you do it. But you need to be incorporating every bit of downtime that you have throughout the day. Instead of watching 2 YouTube videos, we're going to spend 10 or 15 minutes doing flashcards. Instead of sitting down and binging Bridgerton, which you should do after the bar. If you like naked people and Jane Austen, you should totally do that. But for now, we don't have time for that. We're not binging anything right now. No matter how tired we are, we're going to sit down and we're going to try and do something for an hour at night, whether it's practice problems, practice question, practice reading and outlining some essays, writing your scripts, doing memorization techniques to remember your scripts for the subjects that you don't know and you don't have time to learn, or just doing more flashcards or whatever. That's what we should be doing. Now, for those of you who do have all week, you've got a lot more opportunity to really focus your time in ways that make sense. So it might behoove you to group subject areas that make sense together. Contracts, torts, and remedies. Those go well together like peanut butter and chocolate. Secured transactions, corporations, and maybe wills, or sometimes I like to lump family law and wills together. What I think is important to do is to look at all the subjects that you have to review and figure out if you can at least hit those subjects 2 or 3 more times throughout the week, and preferably at least 3. So you want to be able to spend time grouping things up. So I've got my civil procedure, I've got my criminal procedure together over here, and I'm going to do an hour of reading and outlining crim law essays, an hour of reading and outlining civil procedure essays, an hour of reading and outlining torts essays, and then take a lunch break, and then I'm going to do 50 or 75 or 100 practice MBE questions, and then I'm going to spend some time going over those questions. Or I'm going to have in the morning when I get up, I'm going to do 10 minutes of flashcards, and then at lunchtime I'm going to do maybe 20 minutes of flashcards, and then in the evening before I like after dinner I'm going to do flashcards. So for those of you who have the opportunity to just be studying all week, your challenge is not to overstudy. Because it feels like I only have 1 week, I need to be studying 12 to 18 hours a day. That is a lie. It does not work that way. For those of you who are able to have nothing but time this week, you want to treat this like a full-time job, which means you give yourself adequate breaks, you give yourself adequate meal breaks. If it comes to a point, well, this wouldn't normally be for a job, but if you need to take a quick nap, you can do that too. But you want to make sure that the time you're spending studying is used effectively, and you're not just sitting here staring at a screen or staring at an outline or making 42 million new flashcards that you don't need. Everything should be effective. And just realize, if you study 8 hours a day, you're fine. There's plenty of folks out there who may not be able to study except on the weekends. There's plenty of folks out here who didn't take all of the bar courses that you took. There's plenty of folks out here for whom they're not even going to be able to do more than study the weekend before the exam. So do not fall into the trap of comparing how much time you have with the amount of work you need to do, because many, many people are going to need to do a lot more work than you necessarily will have to do, and vice versa. So make sure you're giving yourself plenty of breaks, plenty of rest, and that you're constantly switching things up. So you're not going to sit for 3 hours and do nothing but write out essays. Between each like maybe every 30 minutes even, you give yourself a break, or you build in breaks the same way that they're going to be given to you on the day of the exam. That's the best way to approach this, is look at the time that they allot, how many breaks you have, and train yourself, train your bladder, train your body to work through that amount of time without a break, so that you can feel what that feels like, and that you can take appropriate, I don't know what you will actually be able to do, but at least you'll know what it feels like. So on the day, you're not going to be surprised, and you're going to realize, oh, maybe I shouldn't have drunk 18 ounces of coffee before I started doing an MPT, since I'm not going to be able to get up to pee. So if you're one of the people who has unlimited time, well, it's limited, it's finite, but I mean, who doesn't have a job, I think you should be mindful of the fact that you don't need to study 24/7. If you can get in 8 hours, that's fine with me. If you can get in 6 hours, that's probably pretty good too. As far as weekends, for those of you who really don't have much time this week to study and you need to use your weekend, you're going to have to go really hard, maybe do one really hard essay day and do one really hard MBE day, where it's just practice, 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 practice. For those of you who have time to study, you can use your weekend mostly as sort of a super review, where maybe you give yourself, an hour per subject for the subjects that you're going to focus on. Now, remember too, I don't think it's worth your time to spend an hour studying admin law 2 days before the bar exam, other than to just keep reading. I mean, I think a good thing you can do over the weekend is to read as many other essays as you have an opportunity to read, and just figure out how to approach them and write out a script and try and memorize that. Those final couple days are really going to be heavily memorization and practice. Ultimately, the final weekend is going to be very dependent on what your personal situation is and what you feel like you really need to have one last crack at. Because when it comes to the day before the bar exam, that Monday before, unless you're the person who did not get the ability to get some time off, or you've been working this whole time, you shouldn't be studying the Monday before. You just shouldn't. You need to give yourself time to physically recuperate from all the studying. You need to give yourself time for your brain to just sort of recover from all the cramming and all the reviewing and the practicing that you've done. And also, you're going to need that full day just to ensure that you have your logistics right. And that means clearing your room so there's nothing behind your camera, making sure you've got the most comfortable chair you can get, making sure that you have adequate Wi-Fi if you can. If you have the finances to get like a mesh network to help improve the quality of your Wi-Fi in your house. I mean, there's not much you can do the day before. If you don't know it, literally, if you don't know it now, you're not really going to learn it. You can fake it, but the day before the bar exam is not the day to decide, I'm going to learn some new rule of law, or I'm going to try and cram something. If you don't know it the day before, you're not going to know it. And all you're going to do is get confused, tank your confidence, and make it more difficult for you to succeed the next day. So the way to take your power back the day before the bar exam is to focus that whole day on making sure you've got everything logistically correct. You know what you're going to eat. If you have to go shopping for food or whatever, you know what you're going to wear. You know what what the room is going to set up. You've made agreements with people in your house to leave you alone. You've got a quiet space. Whatever it is you need to do, that's what you need to do. You should be focusing on the logistics, what you're going to eat. How is the day going to play out? Make sure that read the rules. If you haven't read the rules for the online bar exam at this point, read them now and read them twice, because some states will allow you to have a beverage if it's in a clear plastic container with no label and you show it to them. Some states like Illinois, they won't let you eat or drink. Some states require you to wear a suit. Some states, like, there's all these like local rules that are weird. And even though the test might be UBE, the individual state has different requirements. And some states might allow cutting and pasting. Some states might not. Some states might allow you to I don't even know right now. I mean, we still haven't seen a full-length UBE be tested online, so I don't know. But that's why you need to read the rules. Be 100% sure of what the rules are. The last thing you want to do is read the rules the day before the exam, and for whatever reason, you're going to have to violate one of those rules because you weren't prepared. Read the rules now, and read them twice. Make sure you're 100% clear on how that's going to play out so you can spend that last day organizing your space. And if you can't get a space in your own house, maybe you have an opportunity now to ask somebody if you can share their office space, or they can open up a room for you, or you can get a quiet place to work at your law school or something, or at a local bar association or something like that. But don't wait till the day before. If there's any possibility that the space where you were planning to take the exam is not going to work out for you, you have very limited time to remediate. So reach out to whoever you can, whether it's your law school or a bar prep advisor or something, and figure out where you're going to be able to go to take that exam. And the Monday before is when you're going to spend that time figuring out how long does it take to get there if I have to travel. What can I do with the space? Do I have to organize it in a certain way? Do I have to take out some phones so we're not getting interrupted? Whatever it is, make sure that you spend that final day just on logistics. Now, with that being said, for those of you who are not going to be able to take that final day off and are either you took the day off from work so that you can study, or you're not able to take the day off work, you're still going to have to get your logistics sorted out sooner probably. So you'll probably have to spend the weekend before the bar exam making sure you have all your logistics sorted out, and that you know where you're going to take the exam, and that the place that you're going to take it conforms to all the rules for your jurisdiction. Now, if you're working the day before the bar exam, there's not really a lot you can do. What I would recommend that you do is just try and do some light review. Like, look over your flashcards or try and type out as many rules of law as you can. If you feel anxiety building, stop and just visualize success. Do some mindfulness, some yoga, whatever, guided meditation, anything you can think of to just break through the fear. Because it's really important that you're able to get a good night's sleep, that you're able to wake up refreshed and ready to go, and that you have a plan, like, what am I going to eat? Something going to sustain me, but not weigh me down. That you're, and I think right now is a good time also to start weaning yourself off of caffeine. If you feel like you need caffeine to function, you're going to need to wean yourself off of that, because it's going to interfere with your ability to sleep. It's going to raise your blood pressure, raise your anxiety levels, and it's going to make it more difficult for you to focus overall. So it's a difficult situation not having much time to study, which is why you really have to be very, very clear in diagnosing what your biggest problems are. I don't know the law is not a diagnosis. You do know a lot of law, and you just have to figure out which laws do I know enough that I can articulate something in my own words that approximates the rule. Which rules am I going to have to make up? And which areas can I just download my own script or create my own script? And some people might have done this already. There are people out there who've created what they call shell answers or scripts for various subjects. Reach out to your friends, to your bar prep companies, to anybody who might. The bar prep companies aren't going to actually help you with these scripts, but your bar exam advisors at your law school or other tutors or things like that might have resources this way that can kind of help you. But when in doubt, make your own, put it in your own words so it's easy for you to remember. So this has been a very long and winding road to the end of this video, but I want to let you all know that you are doing what you can, and you're doing the best that you can under incredible situations. So please, 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 as we move through this final week, whatever challenges you face, just realize that you have all the skills and abilities to overcome any obstacle that's thrown your way. You just have to have confidence in yourself. Think of all the things you had to do to get where you're at right now. You had to go through 4 years of college, possibly more. You had to take an LSAT or a GRE. You had to go to law school. You had to take your first exam. You had to take the MPRE. You had to do all of these things, and you're still here. This last final hurdle is just the last thing that you have to overcome. And regardless of what happens next week, this is not a representation of who you are, how competent you are, how knowledgeable you are, how skillful you are, or the quality of lawyer that you are. Because you're all lawyers. You're just unlicensed. And this last thing is not the thing that is going to prevent you from living out your dream, because I'm assuming many of you went to law school because it was your dream. Some of you went because you were forced. Some of you went because you were an English major and you hated math and didn't know what else to do. But whatever reason you're here, you're good enough, you're smart enough, and you're going to be able to succeed. It might not be next week, but it is going to happen. So thank you very much for your attention. I hope that this has been helpful. You can tweet at me at 420 ATTY Chicago. I will help you insofar as I can. And we're definitely going to be doing a Friday night last minute Q&A that you can follow me on Twitter to find out more information about that. It'll be at 6 p.m. Central Time. So definitely, if you have time for that on Friday, definitely tune in for that Zoom so that you can get your questions answered. But if you have a question before that, please go ahead, tweet at me or put it in the comments below. So stay warm out there and get to work.